At 1 in the morning, the neighbor living next door called me completely panicked. Whatever happens, do not open the door to anyone. I woke up startled. I was going to ask her what was happening, but the call cut off, and then the banging on the door started, insistent for almost 5 minutes, and then absolute silence. I gathered my courage, approached, and looked through the peephole, and what I saw made me fall backward. But before continuing, check if you have already subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We would love to know how far our stories on Elderly Stories reach. I woke up with a start in the middle of the night. The house was plunged in silence, but in my ears my heart was beating hard like a war drum, and then I realized what had pulled me from my sleep. The ringing of the phone. It rang with a sharp, piercing insistence, tearing through the silence of 1 in the morning. Stumbling, I got out of bed and grabbed the phone from the table. The blue light of the screen hurt my eyes. A familiar name appeared. Mrs. Miller. She was the widowed neighbor who lived alone in the house across the street. I knew Mrs. Miller would never call me at this hour unless something truly terrible was happening. I slid my finger across the screen and brought the phone to my ear with my voice still raspy from sleep. Mrs. Miller. On the other end, there was no usual greeting. I could only hear ragged, agitated breathing. Her voice was trembling violently. It lowered until it became a desperate whisper, as if she had a knife to her throat. Eleanor, listen to me. Whatever happens, even if you hear things, do not open the door to anyone. The warning stabbed straight into my mind. A shiver ran down my spine. What is wrong, Mrs. Miller? Where are you? I tried to ask, but before I could finish the sentence, a sharp screech of static sounded on the line, and then nothing. The call cut off. Just at that instant, a dull thud was heard at the front door. My heart paralyzed. My whole body went rigid. 2 more knocks. It was not the knocking of someone polite. They were full, open-handed slaps, loud, rhythmic, persistent. Each blow was like a hammer directly to my chest. I tiptoed out of the bedroom. I pressed my ear against the cold wall of the hallway. The sound rumbled in my ears, making my whole body vibrate with each hit. Gathering all my courage, I shouted loudly, trying not to let my voice break with fear. Who is it? There was no answer. Only the knocking continued constant, as if it would never stop. Fear overwhelmed me. I ran to the foot of the stairs, looked up into the darkness of the 2nd floor and yelled, "Stephen, can you hear me? Stephen, come down with Mom." Only heavy silence answered me. Normally, even the slightest noise would wake him up. What on earth was happening? Desperate, I ran to the living room, grabbed the tablet, and opened the security camera app, but the screen was completely black with a cold line of text in the center saying no connection. I tapped and tapped several times, but it was useless. All 4 cameras were offline. I ran to the porch light switch and pressed it several times, but the darkness remained intact outside. Had the bulb burned out, I could not remember the last time I checked it. Everything was against me. I was completely isolated, blind and deaf to what was happening right outside my own house. Desperate, I dialed Mrs. Miller number again, praying she would pick up and tell me what was going on. The phone rang over and over until it cut off by itself. There were no other options. I dialed 911. My voice was shaking. It barely came out as I reported that someone unknown was trying to force the door of my house at number 14 Pine Street. The operator assured me they would send a patrol car immediately. Just as I hung up, the knocking stopped suddenly. That sudden silence was even more terrifying than the noise before. It covered everything tense, like a tightrope. Had they gone, or had they found another way in? A strange impulse, a crazy curiosity stronger than fear, led me to the door. My hand trembled as I touched the freezing doorknob. I inhaled deeply, closed my eyes tight, and then slowly brought my face close to the small peephole. What I saw almost made me scream. The face of Stephen, my son, was pressed right there, occupying the entire field of vision. But that was not my son. It was not Stephen. With his warm smile and kind eyes that I knew, his eyes were wide open, empty, lifeless. The corner of his mouth curved into a strange smile, a hollow grimace with no emotion whatsoever, and behind him, blurred in the darkness, were 4 tall figures. They wore black robes with hoods that completely covered their faces, standing like stone statues. I fell backward, hitting the wall hard. I did not dare look a second time. That image was too gruesome. It was etched into my retina. A few minutes later, police sirens began to sound in the distance, getting closer rapidly. Red and blue lights projected through the living room window. Police opened the door, shouted a firm voice from outside. I did not dare go down. I remained sitting on the floor shaking, and I yelled from the top of the stairs, "I am up here! Help me!" I heard them talking among themselves, and then a loud boom when they forced the door. The sound of the deadbolt breaking echoed through the house. Hurried footsteps of boots invaded the living room. Their flashlights moved everywhere, cutting the darkness into pieces. "Ma'am? Where are you?" asked a police officer. Only then did I stand up, trembling, holding onto the handrail, and went down. The front door was completely destroyed, the entrance illuminated by the flashlights, but there was no one, absolutely no one. At that moment, the door to my grandson Matthew's room opened slowly with a creak. Jennifer, my daughter-in-law, came out. She was wearing silk pajamas, rubbing her eyes with a sleepy face. "What is happening, Mom? What is all this noise?" I tried to explain everything in the middle of the chaos, stammering about Mrs. Miller, call the banging on the door, Stephen face in the peephole and the hooded figures. The older officer, who seemed to be the chief, looked at me with pity. He turned to look at Jennifer, and then looked at me again. "Ma'am," he said with a calm but distant voice, "maybe you had a nightmare. Sometimes, due to fatigue and age, we have hallucinations." I stood there stunned. "Hallucinations?" Jennifer nodded quickly. "Yes, officer, lately my mom has not been sleeping well." Then she turned to me, put a hand on my shoulder, and said with feigned sweetness, "It is okay, Mom. It was just a nightmare." But when I looked into her eyes, I did not see the sincere concern of a daughter-in-law. I saw something different. A look difficult to describe that appeared for an instant and vanished. It was calculation, not compassion. That night they changed the lock for a temporary one and left. Jennifer helped me up to my room, then went back to Matthew's room. I stayed on the living room sofa staring at the new shiny door. I knew what I saw was real. I am not crazy. I remained motionless on the sofa until the first rays of dawn entered through the window slit. That night, sleep abandoned me completely. My whole body ached, not from age, but from stress. The first thing I did was not make coffee or wake Matthew up. I put on a sweater, slipped on my slippers, and went straight out to the street. The morning air was freezing, but I felt nothing. My only goal was the faded blue door of Mrs. Miller's house. She was the only one who knew what happened, the only hope I had left to confirm I had not gone crazy. I rang the doorbell. It sounded weak with interference. No one answered. I rang again and again. I lost patience and started banging on the door with my hand. My knocks echoed desperately in the silent alley. "Mrs. Miller, it is me, Eleanor. Open up, please." A long while passed. Just when I was about to give up, I heard the click of the latch. The door opened just a crack, enough for me to see one of her eyes and some strands of her gray, disheveled hair. That eye shone with fear. She looked at me as if I were a ghost. The woman voice was hoarse, whispering through the crack in the door. "I already warned you, Eleanor. I did everything I could. Please do not drag me into this anymore." Her eyes looked behind me as if she feared someone was standing in the darkness. "They are everywhere." "Who is everywhere?" I begged, trying to put a foot in the door. "Mrs. Miller, please tell me what happened to my Stephen." But she just shook her head violently. Panic gave her the strength to push the door violently. "I know nothing. Do not look for me anymore." The door slammed in my face. I clearly heard her throw the deadbolt, followed by the metallic sound of a chain. All doors had closed for me. I stood there paralyzed in the middle of the alley. A sensation of loneliness and helplessness wrapped around me completely. I returned home with my mind in a mess. The house was in a terrifying silence. A faint smell of coffee coming from the kitchen told me Jennifer was already up, but there was no laughter from Stephen, nor his voice teasing Matthew, nor his warm presence. The house seemed to have lost its soul. The first day passed in desperate waiting. Stephen did not come back. I called him dozens of times. The phone rang and rang without anyone answering until that robotic voicemail voice activated. "Hi, this is Stephen. I cannot answer right now." I sent him message after message. "Where are you?" "Call Mom now. I am very worried, Stephen." Not a single response. The phone screen remained black. I looked for Jennifer, who was watering the plants on the balcony. I tried to stay calm. "Jennifer, do you know if Stephen went somewhere? He has not come home and he is not answering the phone." She turned around, showing a perfectly acted surprise. She took off her gardening gloves. She shrugged. "Surely he went out for something urgent for work, Mom. Maybe he was in a meeting and his phone battery died. He is a grown man, do not worry so much." That phrase, "he is a grown man," hit me like a bucket of cold water. But I tried to believe her. Maybe I was worrying too much. However, the second day also passed without news of Stephen. Worry turned into real, tangible fear. I could no longer sit still. With trembling hands, I dialed the landline number of the company where he worked. A young voice from the reception answered. "Hello, this is Eleanor Stephen Miller, mother. Sorry to bother you, but I wanted to know if he went to work today." There was a moment of silence. I heard the sound of papers. "Let me check." "Ah, Mr. Miller called to report sick and asked for a week of leave, ma'am." I felt as if someone squeezed my heart. A week Stephen never got sick without telling me. He knew how much I worried. That was not my son. That night, I could not take it anymore. While Jennifer washed the dishes in the kitchen, I went in and stood right behind her. My voice had nothing sweet left in it. It turned sharp like a razor. "Jennifer, tell me the truth. Where is Stephen?" She startled. She almost dropped a plate. She turned around. She dried her hands with her apron, her face slightly confused. Suddenly, she seemed to remember something. She slapped her forehead. "Oh, silly me," she said with a tone so natural it gave me chills. While she continued washing the dishes, she added, "Oh, yes. The day before yesterday, he called me when I was at the supermarket. My cell phone was almost out of battery, so we spoke very little. He told me an old friend had returned to town and they organized a last-minute camping trip with the group. He told me there is no signal there. That is why he asked that no one worry. I have been so busy I forgot to tell you. Sorry, Mom." I froze. Every word coming out of her mouth was more absurd than the last. Stephen camping. My son hated camping. He was afraid of bugs, he was bothered by mud, and he would never have slept in a small, cramped tent. The last time they forced him to go camping, he was 15, and he complained for a whole month after that. I stared at my daughter-in-law. I was trying to find some sign of a lie, a blink, a hint of nervousness. But no, she was completely calm, going about her business as if she had just told an unimportant anecdote. She avoided looking me in the eyes, concentrating on placing the dry dishes in the drainer. That calm, that chilling calm was more terrifying than Stephen's disfigured face through the keyhole last night, more terrifying than those hooded figures dressed in black standing in the dark. A horrible, dark, and freezing suspicion began to germinate inside me. My daughter-in-law, Jennifer, was not only lying, she was hiding something, and I am sure it has to do directly with my son's disappearance. 2 more days passed. The house that was once my home had now become a silent theater stage. There Jennifer was the lead actress, and I the forced spectator. She continued behaving with total normality, a normality that was strangely disturbing. She hummed a happy melody while making breakfast. She asked me if I had slept well with a radiant smile. She even complained about the high price of avocados at the market. Every gesture, every word of hers was perfect. Jennifer fit the role of an exemplary daughter-in-law. But for me, that normality froze me to the bone. To not lose my mind with so many conjectures, I decided to clean the house. It was my way of clinging to reality, of seeking a little order in the middle of the chaos enveloping me. I started with Matthew's room. The boy was playing alone in the backyard. His clear laughter reached upstairs, a sound that clashed with the tension in the air. His room was full of his little child world. I picked up the toy cars scattered on the floor, carefully organized the superhero comics. I approached his desk where colored pencils and sheets of paper were everywhere. While I was picking up the sheets to stack them, a drawing caught my attention. It was different from the usual ones. There were no superheroes or colorful cars. This drawing was made only with a black crayon. The crooked, almost trembling lines formed a chilling contrast on the white background of the paper. I took it in my hands and immediately they started to shake. My whole world stopped. It was a circle. A circle formed by elongated, deformed human figures with long robes and pointed hoods. They were grouped looking toward the center. And in the center of that circle was another man, with his arms extended as if he were nailed to an invisible cross. The face of that man, drawn with the innocence of a child, was just an empty circle with 2 dots for eyes and a straight line for a mouth. But it conveyed an empty, soulless expression that froze the blood. It was identical to Stephen's face that I saw through the keyhole that night. My heart beat hard in my chest, so strong I feared it would break. The air became thick. It was hard for me to breathe. This was not imagination. It was not a nightmare. It was proof drawn by my own innocent grandson. I squeezed the sheet between my fingers and ran almost running to the patio. Matthew was still playing, focused on filling his red bucket with sand. The sunlight reflected on his fine hair. I forced myself to use the softest voice possible, a voice that would not betray the terror boiling inside me. "Matthew, my love, you draw beautifully. Can I see this one?" I crouched next to him and showed him the drawing. "And these people, who are they, honey?" I pointed to the robed figures. The boy did not lift his head. He kept playing with the plastic shovel. His voice was clear, innocent. "It is Mom, friend, Grandma." An invisible hand squeezed my chest. "Mom, friend." I tried to keep my voice from shaking. "And when did they come home?" "At night," he answered without looking at me. "When you are already asleep, they come to play with Dad." "Play with Dad?" I felt my throat dry. "What do they play, my love?" "I do not know." The boy stopped his hands and scratched his head. "They stand around Dad and say weird things. Mom says it is a secret adult game. I wanted to play too, but Mom did not let me. She told me not to tell Grandma." Finally, the boy looked at me. His eyes were pure, without a hint of a lie. He smiled an innocent child smile. "It is our secret. Yes, Grandma." Every word of his was like an invisible hammer blow to my head, leaving me stunned when you were already asleep. Those words repeated endlessly in my mind, and then a memory hit me sharp and terrifying. Every night without fail, Jennifer brought me a cup of very hot chamomile tea. "Here, Mom, so you sleep well," she always told me with a tender smile. And yes, I slept. I slept a strange sleep, too deep. I never woke up at midnight, which was rare for an older person who usually gets up for the bathroom. I thought it was exhaustion. But no, it was not care. It was poison disguised as sweetness. I tried to smile at Matthew, a crooked smile. "Yes, my love, it is our secret." I got up and went back into the house. My head was spinning. I no longer felt fear. Fear had given way to a cold rage and an iron determination. I immediately took my cell phone. I placed the drawing on the kitchen table where there was good light, and I photographed it from various angles, making sure it was very clear. Then I folded the drawing carefully. I went into my room and hid it between the pages of an old family album resting on the closet, a place where I knew Jennifer would never look. That night, as if she were a programmed robot, Jennifer brought me tea again. "Here is your tea, Mom." I smiled as I took it. I thanked her. Her eyes remained clear, her smile just as sweet. But now I had seen the demon behind that mask. As soon as she turned around, I walked to the fern pot in the corner of the room and silently emptied the entire cup of hot tea into its roots. That night I did not sleep. I sat in the darkness of my room. Silence no longer brought peace. It was a trap waiting to snap shut. The fear of the previous days had solidified into a cold and sharp plan. I could not continue being a fragile and confused old woman. I had to act. I had to find proof. The next morning, when the first rays of sun touched the windowsill, I started my performance. Trying to get out of bed, I pretended a leg failed me and let out a loud "ouch" full of pain. Immediately, I heard Jennifer hurried footsteps down the hallway. She ran in with a perfectly worried face. "Mom, what happened?" I was sitting on the edge of the bed with a hand clutching my knee, my face furrowed as if enduring terrible pain. "Oh, my knees! It must be the weather change last night. It hurts so much I do not think I can walk, Jennifer." She believed it instantly. That morning I was an impeccable actress. I walked around the house limping each step, accompanied by a slight moan. I complained about not being able to bend down to get the remote control, about not being able to put on my socks without making a face. During breakfast, I purposely dropped the spoon and looked at her as if I could not pick it up. and then I threw the bait. What a nuisance, I sighed, rubbing my knee. I remember Mrs. Rose told me her daughter Paula is now a very good doctor. Maybe I should go to her to see what she thinks, because the way I am, I only end up bothering you. Jennifer suspected nothing. Her worry flowed like a spring she already had prepared. What are you saying, Mom? How are you going to be a bother? She quickly took her cell phone. Let me call Paula Clinic right now to schedule an appointment for you. Mom health is the most important thing. Her sweet voice now sounded completely fake. It rumbled in my ears like a frozen screech. She would do anything to keep the image of an exemplary daughter-in-law, a perfect facade to hide all her dark intentions. At Paula Clinic, a clean and bright place, Jennifer accompanied me to the waiting chair. Sit here calm, Mom. I will go get the number. When she walked away, I told her, raising my voice a little, Jennifer, when it is my turn to go in, stay out here, okay? I am embarrassed to talk about my old lady ailments in front of my daughter-in-law. She accepted, delighted, perhaps even relieved to be able to stay a while texting or checking her cell phone. Sure, Mom, whatever you want. The moment the doctor office door closed, separating me from Jennifer, I felt like I was taking off heavy armor. I straightened up. The pain disappeared completely. Paula, sitting behind her desk, looked up surprised. Aunt Eleanor, what is wrong? A while ago, outside, you looked very much in pain. Without giving any unnecessary explanation, I walked quickly to the desk, took out my cell phone, and opened the photo of Matthew drawing. Look, honey. My voice was a hurried, tense whisper. This is what is really happening. And with a low but urgent voice, I told her everything. The call in the middle of the night, Stephen empty face, Jennifer creepy calm, and finally the chamomile infusion every night. Paula listened, and her normally smiling face turned serious firm. She did not think I was crazy or exaggerating. She looked deeply into my eyes, dark from sleepless nights, and saw in them genuine horror and pain, and she believed me. We need irrefutable proof, Aunt, she said firmly, with the rational and decided tone of a doctor. A drawing made by a child is not going to convince the police. She stood up. I am going to draw blood. In the record, I will put that they are common tests to check inflammation for arthritis, but in reality, I am going to request a complete toxicology panel. It will detect almost all known sedatives if they are in your blood. While she took the sample, I noticed her hand did not tremble a bit. It gave me a strange feeling of security. I am going to ask for it to be done urgently. Maybe this very afternoon we will have preliminary results, she said in a low voice. When we finish, do not go straight back home. Go to my mom, Mrs. Rose's house, and wait there for me to call you. It is safer. I left the clinic and continued acting like a poor lady with joint pain in front of Jennifer. I told her the doctor had drawn blood, and I had to wait for the results, and that in the meantime I wanted to stop by Mrs. Rose's house to distract myself a while. The following hours felt eternal. Sitting in the living room of Rose, my lifelong friend, my mind was spinning. She squeezed my hand tightly without asking questions, giving me silent support. Every time the phone rang, my heart stopped, until finally it arrived. My cell phone vibrated, and Paula's name appeared on the screen. I breathed deeply before answering. The girl voice on the other end of the line was grave and cold without the slightest trace of usual warmth. Aunt Eleanor, you were right. I held my breath. My ears were ringing. They found traces of a benzodiazepine derivative in your blood, continued Paula, with a monotone voice as if reading a report. It is a type of mild sedative, but the concentration indicates that you have been exposed continuously almost daily for a long period of time. I stammered. That means... What does it mean, honey? Paula inhaled deeply over the phone. I could hear it. It means someone has been putting that medication in your food or drink every day, for a long time. Holding the phone in my hand, I felt a shiver run down my spine, but at the same time a strange sensation of relief invaded me. I was not crazy. What I saw, what I suspected, everything was true. The proof was no longer a clumsy drawing by a child. It ran through my veins, impossible to deny. There are truths that only speak when everything goes silent, and if you want to listen until the end, stay with stories that hurt. Okay, now let us continue with the story. Rose, my lifelong friend with whom I have shared so many joys and sorrows, was still sitting in front of me, observing every minimal expression on my face with a tense face. She did not need to ask. It was enough to look at my eyes already, without tears, only full of emptiness to understand. "It is true, right, Eleanor?" Her voice lowered in tone, loaded with weight. I could only nod my head, my throat closed, unable to utter a word. Instead of speaking trembling, I passed her the phone so she could see. The screen still showed the photo of Matthew drawing Rose, put on her reading glasses, and narrowed her eyes to look better. She slid her finger over the dolls with robes, the lifeless faces of the figures in the center. She went over and over the image until suddenly she stopped. She used 2 fingers to zoom in on a small detail in the corner of the drawing that I, in my panic, had not noticed. A symbol scribbled that Matthew had drawn next to one of the hooded figures looked like an eye in the middle of 2 curves in the shape of a crescent moon. "My God," she murmured, bringing a hand to her mouth, her previously rosy face now pale. This cannot be." She got up suddenly, almost running toward the old mahogany bookcase in the corner of the room. She rummaged through the bottom shelf for a while, until she pulled out a yellowish cardboard box covered in the dust of years. She placed it on the table. The dry thud resonated against the wood. Upon opening it, inside were old folders, newspaper clippings yellowed by time. This is what Joseph kept after retiring. The cases he could never forget. She turned page after page with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the letters, the blurry photos of the crime scenes. Finally, she stopped at a sheet where there was a stapled police sketch. It was that one, a drawing of the same symbol found at the scene of a gruesome serial murder case from many years ago, an eye in the middle of 2 curves identical to the one Matthew had drawn. The shadow of blood. Rose whispered that name, and it sounded like a curse. My husband chased them for almost 10 years before retiring. He said they were like a ghost, that they never left a trace, just this symbol, and destroyed families. Just at that moment, the house door opened. A tall man, with hair already splashed with gray, entered. It was Joseph Rowe's husband, former police inspector. His gaze was sharp as a razor. Despite being retired, his bearing still conveyed the authority of someone who had spent his entire life facing darkness. Rose did not need to tell him anything else. She just kept silent and showed him the photo on the cell phone along with the test results Paula had just sent to her email. Joseph reviewed everything without saying a word. He showed no surprise or alarm. His face looked concentrated, marked by deep wrinkles of pure attention. He walked from one side of the room to the other with his hands crossed behind his back like a predator sniffing his prey. Then he stopped and turned toward me. "Mrs. Eleanor, I ask you to tell me everything from the beginning to the end. Do not omit even the slightest detail." And so I did. I told him about the knocking on the door, Stephen's soulless face, Jennifer chilling tranquility, the cup of chamomile tea every night, and neighbor Mrs. Miller paralyzing fear. When I finished, Joseph nodded slowly. Finally, he stopped and looked me straight in the eyes. In his look, there was no pity, only understanding and raw truth. "Mrs. Eleanor, I regret having to tell you this, but your son is already in their hands. Jennifer is not your daughter-in-law. She is a wolf in sheep clothing," he explained with a grave and firm voice. "The Shadow of Blood is not a common sect. It is a sophisticated criminal organization that operates under the guise of a religion. They focus on families with some money, emotionally or psychologically vulnerable people. They introduce one of their own, as Jennifer did with your son. Their people infiltrate, gain trust, become indispensable to the family, and then slowly poison the victim with hallucinogenic drugs and sedatives in low doses. They brainwash them, make them believe in absurd doctrines about purification and surrender, and then get them to sign documents to transfer properties, houses, even close people to them." The rituals Matthew saw were actually collective brainwashing sessions. So my Stephen. My voice broke. I felt my heart shattered. It is very likely the boy is in one of their hideouts being purified to prepare him for some kind of delivery ceremony, said Joseph with a firm voice without hesitation. We have been tracking them for years, but they are astute. They change location constantly and leave no tracks. But this time is different. This time we have an eye inside their network. He approached and put a firm hand on my shoulder. His look was serious and full of determination. Mrs. Eleanor, I know this is too much for you. You are scared and have every right to be, but if you have the courage, you are the key to taking down this entire organization and saving your son. You are the only person who can get close to Jennifer without raising suspicions. He squeezed my shoulder gently. Are you willing to collaborate? In that instant, something strange happened. All the fear, confusion, and helplessness I had accumulated in these days disappeared. They did not vanish. They melted, forged in the fire of hate, and a mother love transforming into a cold and solid weapon. I was no longer the weak old Eleanor. I was a mother looking for her son. I raised my head. I looked at the former police inspector straight in the eyes and nodded firmly. What do I have to do? That night, I did not return home. Joseph asked me to stay, and Ro's warm living room suddenly became an operations center. Joseph called some of his old colleagues, retired police officers, but still sharp and loyal. They sat around the coffee table, cigar smoke mixing with the warm light, and their grave and firm voices rose over a map of the city. I sat there, an old woman in a worn sweater, clashing among those men with warrior souls. But inside a strange calm began to be born. I was no longer alone in this battle. The next morning, before the sun came up and before Jennifer woke up, I had already returned in silence. I put back on not only the old sweater, but also the role of an old and sick mother. I went back to limping, complaining of joint pain. When Jennifer asked for the medical test results, I lied to her fluently, a skill I did not even know I had. Dr. Paula said mom health indicators are a little weird, I said, rubbing my knee. She drew blood to do more detailed analysis, but the results will take a few days. Meanwhile, she told me I have to rest absolutely. She showed herself very understanding, even happy that I no longer insisted on going out. Yes, Mom, rest easy. Let me take care of everything. Just as we planned, while Jennifer went out to the market, the doorbell rang. A young man in a telecommunications company uniform was at the door. "Good morning, ma'am," he said loud and clear enough for the curious neighbor to hear. The company is offering a free internet connection review and improvement program for homes in the neighborhood. He was Joseph Envoy in just 15 minutes. While I pretended to prepare hot water, he moved with speed and professionalism. Tiny camera eyes and sensitive recording devices were secretly installed in all key points. Inside the wall clock in the living room, behind the hallway painting, under the dining table in the kitchen. And especially a camera disguised skillfully in a small ornament pointing directly at the fern pot where I used to throw the tea. He did not say much, just gave me a discreet nod before leaving. My house had now become a trap watched 24 hours a day. The next matter was Matthew. "The boy cannot stay here," Joseph told me last night with a firm voice. "He is a witness. It is too dangerous for him to be near Jennifer, and his safety comes first." Rose took charge of resolving this perfectly. She called Jennifer with a happy and animated tone. "Hello, Jennifer, it is me. Listen, this weekend I am going to organize a special summer camp for the grandkids at some friend's estate in the mountains. The air is pure. There are horses. There is a creek. It is going to be very fun. I wanted to invite Matthew too, so he has company. Does that sound good?" Just as Joseph predicted. Jennifer, perhaps wishing to have her hands free to execute her own plan, accepted immediately without thinking twice. "Oh, that is perfect. Thank you so much, really." The boy was already kind of bored being locked up at home. In the afternoon, I personally packed Matthew clothes in his dinosaur-shaped backpack. Upon zipping it up, I hugged him tight. I inhaled the scent of his child shampoo, that innocent and clean smell. I whispered in his ear with a serious voice but full of affection, "Matthew, listen well to what Grandma says. Over there you have to behave well, okay? But remember, do not say anything to your mom about the picture or the friends in black." She has understood. "That remains our secret." Agreed. The boy nodded obediently. His big eyes looked at me with total trust. When Rose's car drove away with Matthew at the end of the alley, I felt an immense void in my chest, but mixed with that sadness was huge relief. My grandson was already safe. Outside the net was already being spread. A small truck from an environmental cleaning company appeared parked on the corner all day. But I knew inside was a technical team glued to screens monitoring every signal from the devices inside my house. Some unknown people started appearing in the neighborhood naturally. A man walking his German Shepherd every morning. A young woman pushing a baby stroller passing several times in front of my house. A group of workers repairing the roof of an abandoned apartment nearby. My street before so familiar suddenly became strange. But I knew they were all undercover police, my invisible protectors. That night only Jennifer and I were in the house. Without Matthew's laughter, the atmosphere became more tense than ever. When she brought me a cup of chamomile tea, I smiled as I received it. The kitchen light reflected in the eyes of that monster disguised as a person, and I knew it also reflected in the invisible eye of the hidden camera. I raised the cup, pretended to take a sip, feeling the heat on my lips. Then while she turned to pick things up, I quickly and silently poured the rest of the tea into the fern pot. I knew every drop I threw was not only proof being recorded, it was an act of resistance. My theater play had truly begun during the next 2 days. I kept playing the role of the sick mother, spending most of the time in the plush armchair, knitting needles in hand. But in reality, all my senses were on alert to the max, my ears attentive to every step, to every phone call of Jennifer. My eyes did not stop observing all her movements from hidden corners, mirrors, and those places where I knew invisible electronic eyes recorded every detail. Joseph had warned me through a brief call from Rose that we needed a golden opportunity, a period long enough for his team to act without being discovered. I had to create that opportunity. I had to be the bait. The plan was already drawn in my mind, simple, but it had to be executed perfectly. That morning, while sitting at the table, I took the local newspaper and pretended to read it over. Then I stopped at a small note. I cleared my throat and read aloud slowly, as if talking to myself. "Oh, today there is a craft fair at South Park. What pretty things. Too bad with these legs I cannot go anywhere." I finished with a melancholic sigh and left the newspaper on the table with a gesture of sadness. Jennifer, who was cleaning the kitchen, turned upon hearing me. Her eyes shone for an instant with what I intuited was a calculation, but she hid it quickly with a kind smile. "If you want to go, I can take you. We walk slowly, and if you get tired, we rest. Being locked up at home all the time does not do you good." Maybe she thought it was a good occasion to continue playing her role of exemplary daughter-in-law, or perhaps she also needed an excuse to leave the house. I looked up, feigning surprise and joy. "Really, daughter? Oh, it would be wonderful. I need to clear my mind a little." At the agreed time, Jennifer took me by car. When the car slowly left the quiet alley, I took a quick look at the rearview mirror. An orange garbage truck was parked at the end of the street earlier than usual. The cleaning worker next to the vehicle held a broom but did not look at the ground. He looked up and stared straight toward our car. Then he nodded slightly with his head, a gesture almost imperceptible. A shiver ran down my spine. It was the signal. The plan had begun. At the fair, I transformed into the pickiest and most curious old lady in the place. I stopped at every stall, from ceramics embroidery to handmade silver jewelry. I took every object, examined it in detail. I asked about everything about its origin, about how they had made it. Although I did not care at all, Jennifer started to get impatient, but she had no other option than to keep smiling and wait. After almost an hour, I insisted on sitting to rest at a small drink stand. I ordered a strawberry smoothie and drank it very slowly, sip by sip, as if it were the best elixir in the world. I knew every minute I kept Jennifer occupied was a valuable minute for Joseph's team at home. Almost 2 hours later, when Jennifer could no longer hide her nervousness, I accepted to return. On the way back, I kept silent, heart beating 1,000 an hour. Had they found anything? Did everything turn out well? When we arrived, everything was as calm as when we left. There was no sign of breaking and entering. The dishes were still in the sink, the kitchen towel hanging on the edge. Joseph's team had been too professional. That night, after throwing the cup of tea in the fern pot again, I received a message from an unknown number. "See you in the usual place." I waited for Jennifer to go into her room, then I put on my coat and went out saying I needed to walk a little to stretch my legs. I took a long turn before deviating toward Rose's house. Joseph was already waiting for me in the living room. His face was tense, but in his eyes shone an expression of triumph impossible to hide. "Did we find it?" I said as soon as I sat down, without any greeting. He put on the table an object carefully wrapped in a police evidence bag. Through the plastic, I could see it was a small notebook with a dark brown leather cover and worn corners. "It was very well hidden," explained Joseph, "under a loose floorboard right under Jennifer's bed, a place only someone who sleeps in that room could know." He pointed to the notebook cover. It had a symbol engraved in eye between two crescent moon shapes. Joseph put on gloves carefully and started turning the pages slowly. Inside were lines written by hand in red ink, full of strange symbols, dates, and names. Some pages described herbal formulas and chemical substances. I shuddered, realizing perhaps there was the recipe for the substance she had given me to drink. There was also a list of hosts already offered with an estimate of their assets. They were names I did not know, families unrelated to me, but in that moment I felt a tragic connection to them. But it was the last page that left me paralyzed. Under a title written in capital letters in a macabre way, "Final Purification Ritual," there was a line written in clear and neat handwriting. "Offering. Stephen Miller. Time 00. Full moon night. Friday, December 1st. Place: the ravine." My blood froze. I looked at the calendar hanging in Rose's house. Today is Wednesday. We only have 2 days. 2 days to save my son from a horrific sacrifice ritual. "Where is the ravine?" I asked with a trembling voice, not recognizing myself. "It is an old canyon on the outskirts of the city where there was an abandoned mine for years," answered Joseph with a firm tone. "A perfect place to do shady things without anyone finding out." He looked at me with determination, but also with deep compassion. "Now we have it all. The time, the place, and irrefutable proof. Her acting gave us the key to all this." He paused and then said every word like a hammer blow. "It is time to lower the curtain, ma'am." On Friday night, under the full moon, the air in the house was so thick it could almost be touched. Jennifer seemed more restless than usual. She kept looking at the wall clock, twisting the edge of her blouse with her fingers, and occasionally spying out the window as if expecting something she no longer hummed while cooking. The house was unsettlingly silent. At 9 o'clock, sharp as always, she brought me a cup of chamomile tea. But this time, she did not leave it on the table and leave. She stayed there watching me. "Drink the tea early and rest, Mom. Today, you look a little tired." Her voice had something different, a disguised urgency. I received the teacup, my old hands completely steady. I looked her straight in the eyes, trying to sketch a last smile. A smile that would end this tragic play. "Thank you, daughter." I brought the cup to my lips. I pretended to take a sip, letting the familiar aroma of chamomile, that smell of betrayal, invade my nostrils. Then, while she turned around, I repeated the gesture that had already become a habit. I emptied the rest into the fern pot. This time the smell of sedative in the air seemed stronger, but it did not make me sleepy. On the contrary, I felt more awake than ever. I went up to my room, pretended to yawn, wished her good night, and turned off the light. But I did not sleep. I sat on the bed in the dark ears, well attentive to any sound, no matter how minimal. My heart beat hard, not from fear, but from expectation. At 11 o'clock sharp, I heard a creak on the floor below. I narrowed my eyes and looked through the crack of the bedroom door. A silhouette moved Jennifer, dressed in black from head to toe. She slid silently toward the front door. It opened and closed softly, almost without making noise. The snake had left her lair. As soon as I heard her car engine start and drive away, I jumped out of bed. I did not waste time changing clothes. I ran down in my flannel pajamas. I cracked the door and slipped into the freezing night air. A dark sedan with no headlights on appeared from the corner and stopped right in front of me. The back door opened. Joseph was at the wheel. His face in the gloom seemed carved in stone. "Get in, Mrs. Eleanor." We followed Jennifer's car at a safe distance, guiding ourselves only by the red glow of her taillights. We left the illuminated neighborhood and took the highway until suddenly she turned onto a narrow dirt road full of potholes, crossing dark and desolate fields on the outskirts. The car bumped constantly, but I felt nothing, my eyes fixed on that red dot moving away. Finally, that dot stopped. The vehicle parked in front of a deep ravine, completely in the dark. The ravine. Further ahead, a path led to a set of old and dilapidated houses like an ancient haunted mining station. But tonight, one of those houses glowed with the red light of candles, projecting deformed ghostly shadows that danced on the rocks. Joseph turned off the engine, and we hid behind some bushes. He handed me binoculars through the magnified glass. My hands began to tremble seeing the scene below. More than 20 people in black robes formed a large circle in the courtyard. In the center, tied to a rotted wooden post, was Stephen. My son, dressed in a thin white garment head fallen on his chest, looked like an empty figure, a body without a soul. Jennifer approached and joined the circle silently. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, wore a hood taller than the others and started muttering strange spells, his voice rumbling in the night with a chilling tone. Inhuman. Joseph grabbed the radio. All teams in position, wait for my signal. Then he looked at me, his voice grave and firm. Are you ready? I nodded, squeezing my hands so hard they turned white. I no longer felt anything but a boiling rage. Below, the leader raised a shiny dagger under the candlelight. The blade reflected the full moon, cold and deadly. He began to approach Stephen. In that instant, Joseph shouted into the radio, his voice tearing through the night. Now immediately the darkness broke with lights and thunder. The powerful spotlights of the hidden police cars turned on at the same time, illuminating the ritual zone as if it were a blinding stage. Sirens howled from every corner, loud and deafening. Police! Everyone hands up. The hooded ones, those shadows of the night, scattered like ants after the collapse of their nest under that brutal light. They screamed, tripped over each other. Uniformed police and undercover agents burst in from every corner. Jennifer was taken down by 2 agents just as she tried to climb the barbed wire fence in the back. The priest's ceremonial knife fell to the ground, making a metallic noise. I paid no attention to anything else. I opened the car door. I ran down the dirt and stone path, not thinking about the pajamas or my bare feet getting hurt with every step. My whole being only sought that white silhouette in the middle of the siege. I ran toward Stephen and with trembling hands untied the rough ropes holding him. I hugged his thin body. I felt his trembling. Stephen, it is Mom. Are you okay, son? Slowly he lifted his head and stared at me. He had cloudy, empty eyes. A long time passed before he blinked, and then he blinked again as if waking from a long and terrible nightmare. A tear slid down his sunken cheek. Mom, he whispered with a weak and broken voice, but it was the most beautiful sound I have heard in my whole life. The raid had been a success. The night of horror had finally ended. The night of horror at the ravine gave way to the pale and cold light of the fluorescents at the police station. I was sitting in a small observation room, separated from the world by tinted glass. On the other side, in the interrogation room, one of the key members of the sect, a thin man with deranged eyes, related everything. Joseph was sitting next to me in silence. His presence was like a firm anchor in the middle of the emotional storm, shaking me. Every confession from that man was a piece of a chilling puzzle, and upon joining them all, the panorama was even crueler than I had imagined. It turned out their original plan was to carry out the final purification ritual for Stephen in my own house in his room. They had already done several rehearsals on previous nights when I fell into a deep sleep because of Jennifer T. That was what Matthew had seen and drawn those secret adult games. They wanted to turn our home into a sacrifice altar. However, although they had already neutralized me with sleeping pills, they still felt unsafe. Our house was in a very populated residential area with neighbors around. A strange noise or a light out of place could raise suspicions, especially considering they had already been in the police sites before. So at the last minute, they decided to move Stephen to a safer and isolated hideout at the ravine. But on that first fateful night, something unexpected happened. Matthew had a very high fever Jennifer in her role of perfect mother. She could not leave without raising suspicions. The plan was delayed. The members of the sect, desperate and unable to contact Jennifer, decided to risk it and return with Stephen to the neighborhood. They did not plan to enter the house, just give her a signal to know what was happening. And it was then that Mrs. Miller, with her old age insomnia, looked out the window and witnessed the gruesome scene. A group of hooded figures dragging Stephen with a lost look down the street. She got very scared and called me immediately. When I looked through the peephole, the one stuck to it was not Stephen. It was one of the cult members trying to peek to see what was happening while Stephen was held behind out of sight. My sudden appearance at the peephole, followed by the call to the police they managed to hear, terrified them completely. They knew they had been discovered. They hurried to take Stephen away and disappeared into the darkness. Jennifer, for her part, after lowering Matthew fever, continued performing her play to perfection. She denied everything. She tried to convince me I was having hallucinations, with the intention of hiding the truth and buying time for her accomplices. She never imagined that feigned calm, that perfection so absurd, would be precisely what ignited my suspicions and caused the fall of everything. Stephen was taken directly from the ravine to the hospital. My son, that healthy and full of life, son I knew was now consumed with sunken eyes, and there were moments when he simply sat for hours, staring at an infinite void. The psychologist said he had suffered severe shock and serious psychological damage due to the high doses of hallucinogenic drugs injected into him. The recovery process would not be quick. It would be very difficult. But then he looked at me with an expression full of empathy. The fortunate thing, said the doctor, is that a mother love brought him back just in time. He still has consciousness. Deep down, he still feels. There is still hope. A few months later, when time that seemed to have stopped began to move again, the trial took place. The whole neighborhood was in an uproar. My house, which was once a quiet home, became the focus of media attention. Jennifer, along with 8 other leaders of the Shadow of Blood, sat on the defendant's bench. They faced multiple charges: kidnapping, illegal deprivation of liberty fraud, intentional injury, and directing a criminal organization. I was sitting in the first row reserved for the victim's family. Behind me, whispers, camera clicks, curious looks were heard, but I heard nothing, saw nothing. My sight was fixed on the back of the woman who once called me Mom. When the sentence was handed down with prison terms so long they would bury what was left of their lives behind bars, absolute silence covered the room. I looked at Jennifer. As if something compelled her, she also turned to look at me. Our gazes crossed in the space between the 2 rows. In her eyes I saw no regret, no pain, not a minimum of guilt. I only saw a terrifying void, and shining inside that void, a spark of hate, a hate directed toward me, the person who ruined all her plans. I slowly turned my head. There were no tears, there was no victor satisfaction, nor was there resentment left. Only absolute cold, a cold reserved for someone who once entered my house, ate my food, took care of my grandson, and then poisoned and destroyed my family from the inside without mercy. As soon as the courtroom door closed, burying Jennifer and her accomplices under those endless sentences, I knew I could not go back to that house. I put it up for sale immediately. I could not live one more day there. I could not breathe that air contaminated with betrayal and deceit. That house was no longer a home. It had become a silent witness to the worst nightmare of my life. Every corner seemed to moan, evoking a gruesome memory. The shrill doorbell at midnight, the brutal banging on the door, the ghostly image through the peephole. All that became an indelible scar marked forever in my memory. We left that noisy city full of prying eyes and whispers of pity. I used the money from the house sale and part of a lifetime savings to buy a small house in a quiet coastal town where Stephen's childhood memories were still clear and pure. It was the place where I took him on vacation when he was a child, where he saw the sea for the first time and laughed out loud when the waves licked his feet. Our new house was simple, with white walls like shells, a blue tile roof like the sea, and a small wooden balcony facing directly the vast ocean. The change of environment had a miraculous effect, like a healing medicine no doctor could prescribe. The fresh and salty sea air seemed to clean all the old nightmares. The constant sound of the waves replaced the terrifying noises inhabiting my memories. Matthew, after receiving dedicated help from psychologists for a while, laughed again. His laughter was no longer shy, but clear and loud. He no longer drew dark figures or strange circles. Now his sheets were full of bright colors and full of life sailboats, with white sails waving in the wind, playful dolphins jumping over the waves, and white clouds floating in a bright blue sky. Darkness had been expelled from my grandson's tender soul, and Stephen, my son, was coming back to life, little by little, like a dry tree reviving after a cruel winter. At first he did not speak much. He was silent, but he acted. He spent all day turning the earth, transforming the dry backyard into a small garden with aromatic herbs and rows of wild daisies. His hands used to this keyboard were now rough from using the shovel and the hoe so much. He started reading again, but not boring economics books, but novels about the sea, about trips to distant lands. Sometimes he went fishing with the old fishermen of the town. His skin tanned by the sun and sea wind, but in his eyes that empty look he had before was no longer there. Life had returned. Sometimes on weekends, Rose and Joseph came by car to visit us. We sat on the terrace, drank tea, and watched the sunset fall over the sea. "You know one thing," Eleanor Joseph told me once, with his gaze lost on the horizon. "Thanks to the notebook found in your house and the testimonies of those people, the police managed to dismantle many other branches of the sect. Many more families were saved from living a tragedy like yours." His words relieved the weight on my chest a little. At least my family pain had served for something. It had lit a warning light for others. Every morning I get up very early before the sun comes up. I am no longer afraid of the darkness. I no longer jump at the noises of the night. I walk barefoot toward Stephen's small garden and pick with my own hands the fresh mint leaves still covered in dew. I prepare a pot of tea. No longer that poisoned chamomile of past days, that tea of deceit and betrayal. This is my tea, the tea of a new beginning with the fresh taste of the earth and my son effort. I pour myself a cup, take it to the balcony, and stay in silence contemplating what I have in front of me. On the golden sand, Stephen and Matthew are building a castle together. Matthew's clear laughter mixes with the murmur of the waves, creating a symphony of peace. Stephen teaches his son how to make the towers with a calm smile that has returned to his face. The sound of the banging on the door at 1 a.m. will forever be part of my past, a nightmare I managed to survive. That scar will never disappear completely. But now, seeing my son and my grandson safe under the bright light of dawn, surrounded by love and the soft sound of the sea waves, I know that nightmare did not manage to win. It could not snatch away the most valuable thing I have. We found our own dawn. I crossed hell and survived to tell my story not as a victim, but as a mother who did not give up. I came to doubt my own memory. I was labeled paranoid. I was alone among wolves disguised as family. But it was a mother instinct and faith in the truth that guided me step by step through the darkness. I want to speak to all those people who are enduring in silence, who are being manipulated inside their own home. Do not stop questioning. Do not allow a false peace to cloud your reason, and never lose your own voice. The best villain is the one who knows how to act like the perfect good person. Trust your intuition. And if one day you feel that everything around you is too quiet, too in order, too perfect, maybe that is the moment to start listening to yourself again. Because sometimes silence is the loudest voice of the truth. The names and places in this story have been modified to protect the identity of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and stops to reflect. How many mothers are enduring in silence inside their own home, I really wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face everything to recover your voice? I want to know your opinion on this story from Elderly Stories, or any suggestion you have so we can improve our content. God always blesses, and I firmly believe courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the final screen, I will leave you two of the most beloved stories of the channel. I am sure they will surprise you. Thanks for having stayed with me until this moment.